So what is light? Light is both a particle and a wave. And this scientist writes, there's a line in Greg Bear's fantasy duology, The Infinity Concerto and The Serpent Mage, where a character describing the basics of magic, notice the word magic, and the papers he said that God is not a magician, says all is waves with nothing waving over no distance at all. I've always really liked that as a poetic description of quantum physics. Deep down, everything in the universe has a wave nature. Now, when you study light, they discovered that light consists of photons. Now, what is a photon? Well, you know, if you shoot photons against the photographic plate, it leaves a mark. So something is hitting the photographic plate, or else there wouldn't be a mark. So, is it a particle? So they would shoot one photon at such a plate, and they'd shoot it through one hole, and they would leave one mark. And if they shot one photon, but there were two holes, it would leave two marks. If they shot one photon through 10 holes, it would leave 10 marks. If they shot it through 1 billion holes, it would leave 1 billion marks. So it cannot be a particle. It must be a wave. Otherwise, one particle couldn't go through more than one hole at the same time. A bullet will go through one, and that's it. So it must have been something else. So if it was a wave, well, then it's not a particle. Then what does it consist of? Well, it consists of nothing. Because there is no mass, there's nothing, but it's a wave. So basically, everything is a wave. Now in 1 John 1:5, it says, this then is the message which we have heard of him and declare unto you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. So in God there is no darkness. So why did he come to this earth that was dark and decided to create light? And if God is light, then it is easy to create light because he is light. Now if we want to study what we all consist of, then we can go to the scientists again and ask them, well, what does matter consist of? This is CERN, this is the Hadron Collider, where they take a proton and they have two proton beams going in opposite direction at great speed, and then they crash them one upon the other to find out from the debris what they consist of. And this is what it looks like in the Hadron Collider, and the idea, according to them, metaphysically, is not just to find out what everything consists of, but to create a wormhole in order to transcend dimensions from one to another. So this is an area where physics and metaphysics seems to blur. And their symbol at the CERN facility is the god Shiva, who is the god of destruction. Because the Hadron Collider wants to collide protons and other particles to see what they consist of. Now, in the good old days, when you studied physics, you found out that everything consists of atoms, and atoms consist of protons and neutrons and electrons. And then you wanted to find out what do they consist of. Well, then science found out that there were many, many particles that each one of these consisted of. And if you looked at a proton, well, then they consisted of quarks. And a quark is always bound in threes. And there are up quarks and there are down quarks. Or if you reverse it, then you have down quarks and an up quark and a neutron. If you have an antiproton, then you have an antiquark, anti-up quark and an anti-down quark. And an anti-neutron would have anti-down quarks and an anti-up quark. But you can also get, instead of up quarks and down quarks, you can get strange quarks and charm quarks and top quarks and bottom quarks. And you get colored quarks, although they have no color. You can get red quarks and blue quarks and yellow quarks, and everything's full of quarks. Question is, when you collide them, what do you get? What does a quark consist of? And what does an electron consist of? Well, an electron is basically acting like a photon, except that it's bound and it now has mass, which it didn't have before. And a quark, well, what does that consist of? You can never get a quark by itself. This is the amazing thing. If you collide them and you separate the quarks into separate quarks, they will not be separate, they will always be in that configuration. So you separate them and you have the same that you had before. They will be bound quark to quarks. So now's the question, excuse me, you've just separated the quarks and now they're still bound to quarks. Where do those quarks come from that they're bound to by law? Well, they weren't there before you divided them and now they're there. So where did they come from? They came from nowhere. They came from nothing. So deep down, when you go right down into the atom, everything is wave action like a photon. Now the interesting thing about a photon, which is light, it has no beginning, it has no end, it will travel for all eternity without any change whatsoever. There's no deterioration, nothing. It's eternal. A photon is eternal. So basically everything in matter can, when you break it down to its finest details, be quantified as a variant of light. So light is not just something that is simple, it is the basis of every single element and everything that exists and that everything consists of. And where does it come from? From nothing, except that it has energy. It is a wave. So quarks exist in a soup of other quarks, antiquarks and gluons with a proton or neutron. Determining their mass has been difficult due to their strong force that binds them together. All right, so where do I come from? I come from nothing. That's what science says. What does the Bible say? God spoke and it happened. He created it out of nothing. We call that ex nihilo. So there's no difference really in science and religion, except that the one says there is no personal deity and the other one says there is a personal deity.